All right, everybody, focus up. I need all eyes on me in 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you see this date on the screen. This is probably one of the worst things that's ever happened in American history. Assassination of John F. Kennedy. Please watch closely to this clip of the assassination. You see he is shot there in the neck. And he's over to his wife. And his head literally explodes. Three things, key things that led up to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Three things that created motive. First being the Bay of Pigs. It was a failed military operation that was put on by the Cuban Democratic Revolutionary Front, consisting of Cuban exiles who opposed Fidel Castro's revolution. It was covertly financed and directed by the U.S. government, CIA. Kennedy, due to mistrust of military advisors and the CIA, decided not to give them air support to complete that mission. Another thing that was important is the October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a dangerous confrontation between the United States, Cuba, and Russia, rather. Russia had put Cuban missiles in Cuba and threatened to fire them at the United States if we tried to invade. Backdoor channels during 13-day intense negotiations between the Soviet Union backdoor channels and President Kennedy decided that if we removed Turkish missiles that were pointed at Soviet Union and we did promise to not invade Cuba, then he would remove the missiles. The third thing was in October 1963, Memorandum 263, where President Kennedy was going to dismantle the CIA. His famous quote was saying that he wanted to splinter the CIA to 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. Kennedy was very unpopular in Texas. This was a playbill of him being wanted for treason that floated around Dallas the days coming up to the assassination. Johnson and Kennedy didn't really get along. They were rarely seen together in public in missions like this, in campaign missions, but Kennedy's team knew that they needed, in 1964 election, they needed Texas to win the election. So they decided to go together in Texas on that day. So they were planning on visiting Texas in the summer, and Johnson told the press that hopefully they would have a breakfast in Fort Worth, a luncheon in Dallas, and an afternoon tea in Houston. So then we move on in November 22nd, 1963. At 7:23 a.m., Lee Harvey Oswald enters the school book depository building to report for work. He was carrying a long package. A co-worker asked him what the package was, and he said it was just curtain rods. At 8:45 a.m., the president speaks before breakfast in a square across 8th Street. The attendees members of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. At 9:10 a.m., Kennedy takes his place in the Hotel Texas Grand Ballroom for a scheduled speech in Fort Worth. Afterwards, President Advisor Kennedy O'Donnell informs the Secret Service that the bubble will be taken off the limousine because of the great weather. At 11:38 a.m., Air Force One lands in Love Field in Dallas, Texas. The President and Mrs. Kennedy come off the plane and greet the onlookers, handshaking and whatnot. 11:55 a.m., the motorcade leaves Love Field to downtown Texas. At 12:29 p.m., they enter Dealey Plaza, the famous place where Kennedy was assassinated. You can see they came in through here, and they went down Houston Street, took a sharp turn to head down Elm, which is where President Kennedy was assassinated. At 12:30 p.m., the motorcade made a sharp 135-degree angle left turn onto Elm Street, a downward sloping road. The giant Hertz rent-a-car clock on top of the depository building was seen to change 12:29 to 12:30 at the limousine turn onto Elm Street. Witnesses recalled the first shot was fired and the president started to waving his right hand. Onlookers hearing 4 shots. These shows president emerging from being temporarily hidden by the sign. And his mouth is already open in anguish, expression on Frank 2:25. He has already been impacted by a bullet that struck him in the throat, another in his mid-back. With his eyes clenched into fists, then raises his front of his face, throat as he turns left towards his wife. Connolly is also hit. Security agent Clint Hill testified he heard 1 shot jumped off the running board of the Secret Service follow-up car directly behind Kennedy. At the equivalent frame of 308, with a quarter of a second before the president's head exploded at frame 313. Hill then rapidly ran towards the presidential limo. You can see that Mrs. Kennedy jumps on top of the back of the car to pick up pieces of Kennedy's brain. At 12:36 p.m., President Kennedy arrives at Parkland Hospital. Everything was done to save his life, but the wounds were too severe. At 12:40, a special bulletin interrupted As the World Turns, CBS Bulletin, where they announced the president had been shot, and so was Governor Connolly. At 12:45 p.m., Dan Rather calls the Dallas Police Department, and they suspect, or Parkland Hospital rather, they suspect that President Kennedy has been dead. At 1:16 p.m., the first report that police officer Tibbet had been shot in Dallas, Texas. At 1:38 p.m., Walter Cronkite, probably the most famous news reporter, announced that President Kennedy was indeed dead. At 1:45 p.m., 15 police officers surrounded the movie theater where Oswald was in. At 1:51 p.m., police reported Oswald is in custody. At 7:05 p.m., Oswald was charged with murder with malice in the killing of a police officer. At 11:26 p.m., Oswald was charged with the murder of President Kennedy. On November 24th, 1963, less than 48 hours after Kennedy was assassinated, before live TV cameras, Oswald was shot, mortally wounded in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters by a local nightclub owner who allegedly had mafia ties, Jack Ruby. Unconscious, Oswald was put into an ambulance and rushed to Parkland Hospital, where 2 days earlier, Kennedy was treated. Oswald dies at 1:07 p.m. On September 24th, 1964, the Warren Commission, who was appointed by Johnson to investigate the president's assassination. 888-page final report was presented to Johnson and made public 3 days later, saying 1 shot wounded the president, Kennedy, Governor Connolly, and subsequently shot Kennedy in the head, killing him. The commission concluded the 3rd shot was fired, but made no contact to whether it was 1st, 2nd, or 3rd shot fired. The commission concluded that Oswald fired all 3 shots. January 29th, 1969, in a New Orleans Parish Criminal Court, charges were filed against Clay Shaw in the conspiracy to commit murder of John F. Kennedy. The jury took less than an hour to find Clay Shaw not guilty. It remains the only trial to be brought in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. David Ferrie, other people involved in that case. The jurors were said to have said that they felt there was a conspiracy, but they didn't have enough evidence to convict Clay Shaw. On March 29th, 1979, the House Select Committee on Conspiracies concluded that the assassination was indeed a conspiracy, and therefore more than one person was involved in that shooting. John F. Kennedy was assassinated, ladies and gentlemen. It's us to determine, the free thinkers in this world, to determine what really happened. There have now been reports of unclassified documents classified documents being unclassified, and several people are investigating those things. Bang! Thank you.